Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is attempting to distance himself from the first U.S. airstrike on September 2nd that targeted two shipwrecked men who'd survived an earlier U.S. strike on a boat the Pentagon says was carrying drugs, though they have not provided evidence. Legal experts say the strike was likely a war crime. Last week, the Washington Post reported Hegseth had given a verbal order to, quote, kill everybody on the boat. Hegseth spoke Tuesday during a White House cabinet meeting.
I watched that first strike live. As you can imagine, at the Department of War, we got a lot of things to do. So I didn't stick around for the hour and 2 hours, whatever, where all the sensitive site exploitation digitally occurs. So I moved on to my next meeting. A couple of hours later, I learned that that commander had made which he had the complete authority to do. And by the way, Admiral Bradley made the correct decision to ultimately sink the boat and eliminate the threat.
Hegseth was sitting next to President Trump during the 3-hour cabinet meeting in which Trump appeared to fall asleep a number of times. Since September, the U.S. has bombed at least 21 boats in the Caribbean Sea and Pacific Ocean, killing more than 80 people. Meanwhile, the family of a Colombian fisherman killed in a U.S. boat strike on September 15th has filed a complaint against the U.S. with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. The family of Alejandro Carranza Medina says he was the victim of an extrajudicial killing. In more news from the region, a bipartisan group of lawmakers has introduced a war powers resolution to block the Trump administration from engaging in hostilities against Venezuela without congressional authorization. Israel's announced that it plans to reopen the Rafah border crossing as part of the U.S.-brokered ceasefire, but only to allow Palestinians to leave Gaza. According to the World Health Organization, more than 16,500 sick and wounded people need to leave Gaza for medical care. This comes as Israel says the partial remains returned by Hamas do not match the 2 hostages remaining in Gaza. Palestinian militants are reportedly struggling to find the remains amidst the rubble. Meanwhile, Israel's continued its drone strikes in Gaza, killing Palestinian photojournalist Mahmoud Wadi in Khan Yunis. This is his father, Issam Wadi.
As a father, I received the news with shock. It was like an earthquake at home. I live in a tent. The tent was blown away when I lost my son. He was hit in an abnormal strike, which we weren't expecting on a day like this.
President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, and son-in-law Jared Kushner met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow for nearly 5 hours Tuesday, but a deal to end the war in Ukraine was not reached. Russian officials described the talks as constructive, but said, quote, no compromise was reached on certain issues. Earlier today, Germany's foreign minister criticized Russia, saying he had seen, quote, no serious willingness on the Russian side to enter into negotiations, unquote. Meanwhile, the European Union's agreed to ban natural gas from Russia by late 2027. On Tuesday, Putin warned Europe that Russia was ready for war if it's provoked. This comes as NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte vowed to keep up the supply of U.S. weapons to Ukraine.
The best way to put pressure on the Russians is by doing 2 things. One is making sure that the Russians understand that the weapon flow into Ukraine will keep on going. That's exactly what's happening today, thanks to the US, thanks to the Europeans. US sending its crucial gear to Ukraine, paid for by Canada and European allies.
New details are emerging about President Trump's decision to pardon former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was released from prison Monday. Hernandez was sentenced last year to 45 years in prison for trafficking hundreds of tons of cocaine into the United States. In October, Hernandez wrote a 4-page letter to Trump seeking a pardon, claiming he'd been unfairly targeted by the Biden administration. The letter was delivered by longtime Trump advisor Roger Stone. Some Republican lawmakers have openly criticized Trump's decision. This is Republican Senator Tom Tillis, who said, quote, it's a horrible message. It's confusing to say, on the one hand, we should potentially even consider invading Venezuela for a drug trafficker, and on the other hand, let somebody go, unquote. It's unclear if Hernandez will attempt to stay in the United States or return to Honduras. On Tuesday, some Hondurans in the capital, Tegucigalpa, criticized Trump for freeing Hernandez and for meddling in Sunday's election.
I am against everything that is happening because it's an insult to Honduras, because Honduras really doesn't deserve this. That's because of a political aversion. They come and do this to our country with all the damage Juan Orlando caused here in Honduras. So all of us as Hondurans feel mocked because another country comes to interfere in what we should be doing here in our own country.
This all comes as Honduras continues to count votes from Sunday's presidential election. The centrist Salvador Nasrallah has taken a slim lead over the conservative Nasri Asfura, who has been backed by Trump. On social media, Trump has claimed without evidence the Honduran election officials are trying to change the results of the race. The Pentagon's Inspector General set to release a report Thursday examining Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's sharing of sensitive information about U.S. strikes on Yemen in a Signal group chat earlier this year. The group chat, which included other senior members of the Trump administration, was revealed after Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor of The Atlantic magazine, was accidentally added. According to Axios, a full version of the report has been sent to the Senate Armed Services Committee. The Trump administration's launching an ICE operation to target hundreds of Somali immigrants in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region, according to reporting by the New York Times. An official speaking to the Times says nearly 100 immigration officers and agents from around the country have been tapped for the operation. The directive comes shortly after President Trump lashed out at the Somali community during a cabinet meeting, calling them garbage that he does not want in the country.
I hear they ripped off Somalians, ripped off that state for billions of dollars, billions, every year, billions of dollars, and they contribute nothing. The welfare is like 88%. They contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you, okay? So we could go one way or the other, and we're going to go the wrong way if we keep taking in garbage into our country. Ilhan Omar is garbage. She's garbage.
Democratic Congress member Ilhan Omar responded to President Trump's attack in a post on social media saying, quote, "His obsession with me is creepy. I hope he gets the help he desperately needs," Congressmember Omar said. Meanwhile, the Trump administration announced it's paused green card and U.S. citizenship processing for immigrants from 19 countries already subject to a travel ban put in place earlier this year. This follows the Trump administration's announcement it's pausing all asylum decisions for immigrants currently in the U.S. after an Afghan national has been charged with murdering a National Guard member and critically injuring another in Washington, D.C. last week. He's pleaded not guilty. The Trump administration fired 8 immigration judges here in New York City Monday, according to the National Association of Immigration Judges. The fired judges worked at 26 Federal Plaza, which also houses the New York City headquarters for ICE. Since President Trump's return to office, more than 100 immigration judges out of about 700 have been fired or pushed out. The Trump administration is threatening to withhold money for food benefits under SNAP, that's Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, in most Democratic-controlled states next week, unless they share information on who exactly is receiving those benefits. Earlier this year, the Agriculture Secretary had requested the information to verify the eligibility of 42 million recipients. Soon after, 22 states and the District of Columbia sued the U.S. Department of Agriculture over the request. In October, a federal judge issued a temporary injunction that prevents the Department of Agriculture from demanding the data of recipients and cutting SNAP funds. On Tuesday, New York Governor Kathy Hochul wrote on social media, quote, "Genuine question. Why is the Trump administration so hell-bent on people going hungry?" she asked. In health news, a federal vaccine panel is preparing to vote this week to end the practice of vaccinating all newborns for hepatitis B. The panel, which was handpicked by Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is also expected to discuss making other major changes to the childhood immunization schedule. Sean O'Leary of the American Academy of Pediatrics criticized the move, saying, quote, "Any changes they do make could be devastating to children's health and public health as a whole," he said. A federal judge in Boston has blocked the Trump administration from cutting Medicaid funding to Planned Parenthood and its affiliates across 22 states. The Democratic-led states sued the Trump administration back in July after the so-called One Big Beautiful bill contained a provision that barred Medicaid reimbursements to nonprofits that provide abortion. In her ruling, U.S. District Judge Indira Talwani said the law would, quote, increase the percentage of patients unable to receive birth control and preventive screenings, thereby prompting an increase in states' health care costs, unquote. Planned Parenthood responded to the ruling saying, quote, the district court again recognized the defund law for what it is, unconstitutional and dangerous, they said. The Trump administration's reversing the reinstatement of 14 FEMA workers who signed a petition earlier this year warning the cuts to the agency were putting the U.S. at risk of repeating the mistakes made during the response to Hurricane Katrina. Soon after they signed the letter back in August, FEMA suspended the workers. Last Wednesday, they were reinstated, but hours later, they were suspended again. Jeremy Edwards, a former FEMA official who signed the Katrina declaration, said that the back and forth over the status of the FEMA workers, quote, represents the type of dysfunction and inefficiency that's plagued FEMA under this administration, unquote. Former U.S. Treasury Secretary, former Harvard President Larry Summers has been banned from the American Economic Association over his close ties to the late Jeffrey Epstein. Recently revealed emails show Summers stayed in close contact with Epstein long after the convicted sex offender's 2008 conviction. In Tennessee, the Republican Matt Van Epps has defeated Democrat Afton Bain in a closely watched special election for a U.S. House seat. Van Epps won the race by around 9%, a far smaller margin than Trump's 22-point victory in the district last year. And more than 1,350 people have now died in devastating floods and landslides in Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and Thailand. Hundreds are still missing. Sri Lanka's president described the flooding as the, quote, largest and most challenging natural disaster in our history, unquote. In Indonesia, the death toll has topped 700. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more.